Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 3 of our story tonight. And what a fascinating story. We have a girl and her mother going to a funeral together, and to Great Aunt Betsy's funeral, and it would seem that Aunt Betsy died in a deplorable way. She was obviously killed by a wild animal, but nobody is quite sure what it was that killed her. And maybe answers will never be found, but then again, will they? Perhaps we will find the answers together. So let's continue with the story, but before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and by all means share these stories with anybody who appreciates a good story. So let's continue, shall we? A week to the day after Great Aunt Betsy's funeral, I found myself in the solicitor's offices, herringbone attorneys, with my mother at my side. We had been called to come here to the reading of Great Aunt Betsy's will, something I was not looking very forward to, because it made everything so final, that Aunt Betsy would never be coming back again, that she really and truly was gone. I knew that Great Aunt Betsy would not have anything in particular to leave us, apart from, of course, her valuable asset, her lovely farmhouse. So we both waited with bated breath as the solicitor, Mr. Herringbone, came into the room. "I do hope your Great Aunt Betsy had the sense to leave her house to you," my mother whispered to me, squeezing my hand tightly. My mother was looking so fragile these days, it pained me to even look at her, for losing Great Aunt Betsy had been absolutely unbearable for her. As a consequence, she had lost so much weight. Her cheeks were now sunken in. She rather reminded me of a wilted flower in the meadow that had long since passed its very best. The solicitor, Mr. Charles Herringbone, entered his very swanky offices. He was a tall, slim man, wearing a made-to-measure, very smart pinstripe suit that looked as if it had cost him an absolute fortune. He elegantly sashayed into the room with a rather debonair efficiency. He shook our hands and then slipped into his British racing green leather chair, his eyes pinned on us. "First of all, I would like to take this melancholic opportunity to express my very sad condolences to you in regards to the tragic passing of your Great Aunt Betsy," he said to both me and my mother. "I can't imagine what the two of you are going through during this traumatic time. Grief, I know, is a very difficult thing to get through at the very best of times, and it makes it all the worse for the both of you, given you were very close to your Aunt Betsy." "Thank you, I appreciate that, Mr. Herringbone. It has been tough," I admitted. Mr. Herringbone glanced from me to my mother. "It's very strange. Your Aunt Betsy came into my office a week before her fortuitous death. I do recall she was in quite some state, and now here you are." "She was in quite the state, you say? She came into your offices a week before she died? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Herringbone?" "I'm afraid that is exactly what I'm saying. I don't know whether people have premonitions as to whether they're going to die or not. It is something I've often wondered about. But the way your Aunt Betsy was behaving, it would seem she did have some kind of strange prognostication. She came into the offices with such a determined urgency. She wanted to check the will over and over again to see that all was in apple pie order. She was acting like someone who'd been told they had days left to live. It was exceedingly bizarre. The only time someone has acted like that before was when they had brain cancer, and they were literally given a few days to live. I told her we had plenty of time to go through things, but she was very insistent on going over everything with a fine-tooth comb to be absolutely sure that everything was just as she wanted it to be. She was deeply troubled at the time." Me and my mother looked at each other in absolute confoundment, and then my mother said, "Mr. Herringbone is absolutely right. Didn't I tell you, Rose, that your Great Aunt Betsy was very troubled about something before she died? Something was irking her. I knew it was. And this confirms I was absolutely right. So you think, Mr. Herringbone, that my great-aunt Betsy knew she was going to die? Is that what you're suggesting? I am suggesting nothing of the kind, Mrs. Wokingham. Far from it, in fact. All I am saying is that your great-aunt Betsy was in a dreadful hurry to get her affairs tied up. So I thought that was rather revelatory. I didn't ask her many questions because your great-aunt was not very forthcoming about the matter. Besides, it wasn't any of my business, was it? But I did wonder if her doctor had given her a terminal diagnosis of some kind. No, never, I said. Great-aunt Betsy was one of the healthiest people I know. If she was sick, we'd have known about it. We really would. Would we? My mother asked, looking at me doubtfully. I don't know if we would. I know that your great-aunt Betsy was an open book, but there was a private side to her. I've always suspected that, you know. And when it comes to terminal illnesses, many people don't talk about it, do they? They don't want to upset their families. They sometimes keep those kind of things to themselves. It is a possibility. She could have been sick. Of course she wasn't sick, Mum. We would have known about it if she was. But I do agree with you. Something was going on with her. But maybe we'll never know what it is. It'll always be a mystery for us. Well, I dare say. None of that is terribly important now. It's all water under the bridge, Mr. Herringbone interjected. We can only speculate, can we not, about some of your great-aunt Betsy's enigmatic behaviours. But beyond that, we have no idea what was going on with her. What I do know is that she wrote a letter for you, Mrs. Wokingham, in the tragic event of her death, that she wanted you to read. Mr. Herringbone handed me the letter, which I popped into my purse. I wouldn't be in a hurry to read the letter. I wasn't emotionally ready to listen to my aunt's words, and in the letter I was sure she was going to express her extreme dislike towards Barlow, and I really didn't need to read all about that right now. I already felt like a complete idiot for having married a man like Barlow, for he clearly had not respected me. I did not need a letter from my great-aunt, from beyond the grave, reminding me of my ignorant stupidity. You may not know this, Mrs. Wheeler, said the solicitor, turning to my mother, but recently your Aunt Betsy got you to sign some papers. She said you signed them without even looking at what you were signing. Just word of advice, ma'am. It's probably not a good idea to do that. You should always read what you're signing, because you don't know what you're signing. But I suspect you knew you could trust your Aunt Betsy, so that's why you signed the papers. That's right. I did sign them, but I can't remember exactly what for, my mother said, her face flushing with embarrassment. Well, that was the idea, Mrs. Wheeler. You see, Betsy was a very clever woman. She was as sharp as a tack. She wanted to avoid death duties, so she quickly put her house in your name. In the will, she expresses her great desire for you and your daughter Rose to have her house, and everything in it besides. To do with it what you will. In other words, to split the place between the two of you. She put the house in your name, Mrs. Wheeler, for very obvious reasons. But she wants you and your daughter Rose to own the place together. She also wrote a cheque for you, Mrs. Wheeler. A personalised cheque, he said, turning to my mother and handing her an envelope. Oh, how sweet of Aunt Betsy! Oh, goodness gracious me, said my mother, taking the envelope from Mr. Herringbone and tearing it open. I think she was expecting to find a small cheque, a few $100 perhaps from my aunt. My mother looked at the cheque and gasped. For a moment I thought she was going to faint. She looked up at Mr. Herringbone with a bemused expression on her face. This can't possibly be right, my mother said. Why, Mum? How much is it for? I asked. Well, your great-aunt Betsy has written me a cheque for $1,253,000. Now you know your Aunt Betsy had no money to rub together. Is this some kind of a joke, Mr. Herringbone? My mother said, looking up at the solicitor. Because if it is, I'm not laughing. It's not a joke, Mrs. Wheeler. The money on the cheque is yours. It's what's left in Aunt Betsy's direct bank account, which she wanted you to have. It's a lot of money. Betsy was a wealthy woman. But I guess she kept that under wrap and key. But I don't understand. Where on earth did she get that kind of money from? My mother asked. Well, she received a healthy inheritance from her husband's brother after he died. Something I suspect he never told you about. The man was very, very wealthy. He left everything to her. The solicitor turned around to address me. Now, Mrs. Wokingham, about you. When your Aunt Betsy, your great-aunt Betsy, came to see me, a week before she died, she told me that she was leaving the remaining money in her savings account to you. But she has physically, once again, put the money in your mother's name, so that your husband cannot get his hands on it. Your great-aunt made it very clear to you she did not like your husband Barlow. She told me she didn't trust the man. So your mother, therefore, has been entrusted with the money that your aunt has left exclusively for you. The money is in a savings account. It amounts to over $2 million and is to be deposited into your mother's account and finally into your account when your mother feels the time is right. Your Aunt Betsy believed your relationship with Barlow would not last for terribly long. Mr. Herringbone raised his hand apologetically, as if he was apologizing on Great-Aunt Betsy's behalf. Those were your great-aunt's words, not mine. In short, your great-aunt Betsy wanted the money she left to you to be exclusively yours, Mrs. Wokingham. I think the word she used was, I don't want Barlow to get his grubby hands on my niece's money. I left that money to Rose, so her mother is going to keep that money for her and give it to her when the time is right. She'll know when the time is right, I'm most sure. I was silent for a brief moment, and without realizing it, I spoke my thoughts out loud. Aunt Betsy was right about Barlow. He's a prize cad, and I'm going to divorce him as soon as I can. But he doesn't even know that yet. What do you mean you're going to divorce him? My mother asked, looking confounded. I thought you and Barlow were getting along swimmingly. You've always loved him so much, have you not? What's brought all this on? I thought I did love him, Mum, but I've been an absolute fool. I found out on the day of Betsy's funeral that Barlow has been cheating on me since the day I got married. He even got off with one of the bridesmaids on my wedding day, of all things. I've been such an idiot, Mum, such a fool, so desperately naive. He's been doing the dirty on me for years and years, and I never even knew about it. Aunt Betsy warned me about this, Mum. She told me once a player, always a player. But me, I was so flattered that Barlow was interested in me. I was so blindsided because I really believed I loved him. But I didn't see what was going on under my very nose. I'm such an idiot. My mother looked appalled that I had failed to tell her any of this. I don't understand you, Rose. I'm very disappointed and very hurt that you did not think to tell me any about this. For a week you've known about Barlow's infidelity, and you have chosen not to share this with me. I'm incredibly hurt about this. I just knew you were upset, Mum. You were grieving Great-Aunt Betsy's passing. How could I possibly pile any more grief on you? You were in such a desperate state. I'd have made things a lot worse for you, and I couldn't do that. I could see my mother had become indignantly angry. How dare Barlow cheat on you? How dare he? She snapped indignantly. Your great-aunt Betsy was absolutely right about that dreadful, dreadful man. He's a snake in the grass. I'll kill him myself for what he's done to you. You're my daughter, and he's treated you like trash. My mother started to pound the air very indignantly with her fist. "Ladies," said Mr. Herringbone, raising a hand to silence my mother's outrage, "please try and calm down, will you? There is no point in getting grievously upset about things you cannot change." The heat was indeed rising in his office, rather like the smoke from an incense stick. "We are here to talk about your Aunt Betsy's will, and if I may, I would like to focus on that." "I'm very sorry, Mr. Herringbone, for being so emotionally overwrought. It's not just every day that you hear about, someone cheating on your beloved daughter. It's very hard to take in. "Of course it is, and I fully understand that. What I wanted to do was explain the reason why Aunt Betsy, Mrs. Wheeler, is putting the money she has left for your daughter into your bank account, so that you will be responsible for transferring it into your daughter's account when the time is right. Is that understood?" "Oh, it is understood," my mother chuckled. "Oh, Aunt Betsy, you are one clever woman, you are," she said, clapping her hands in glee. Mr. Herringbone handed me my aunt's savings account details. There was over $2 million in that account that my husband Barlow would never get to see with his naked eyes. I knew if he was aware of losing out on such a windfall, he would be absolutely mortified. But then again, he would never know about this, for he rarely believed that Aunt Betsy was as poor as a church mouse, and I wanted his beliefs to stay that way. She may have been a very open book, but she had kept her burgeoning bank account details a secret for good reason. "Are you sure," I asked Mr. Herringbone, "that my aunt had this kind of money? I just can't understand it. We all thought she was so broke. I mean, yes, she did have that valuable house, but that's the only thing she had that was worth anything. We never believed she had this kind of money. This has come as quite the shock to the both of us." "I understand, but that is what your great-aunt Betsy wanted everybody to think. She didn't want people to know how well off she was. She believed if people knew that you were wealthy, they'd take full advantage of you, and she didn't want any of that in her life." "Well, I suppose that's understandable," I said. When me and my mother finally left Mr. Herringbone's office, we knew with our newfound financial freedom we could do anything we wanted. And it was on this day, a week after the funeral, we both promptly decided to move into my aunt's beautiful farmhouse that very day. It was a stunningly big place, surrounded by groves of lofty trees, and was the perfect place for the two of us to recuperate. If I had been wealthy enough, let's just say I'd have bought a house like that myself. In truth, Aunt Betsy's home was the only thing we believed that she had of value. How wrong we'd been about that. The woman was so much wealthier than we could have ever envisaged. At this moment in time, my mother needed me as much as I needed her. So living together in Great Aunt Betsy's house seemed like a grand idea. We would be the support system for each other. You would think I'd be broken-hearted about the demise of my relationship with Barlow, but ironically, I felt a huge sense of relief, as if an invisible weight that I didn't even know existed had been lifted off my shoulders. I felt the kind of satisfaction you feel when you have a boil that's causing a great deal of pain on your body. It finally rises to a head, and you squeeze out all the pus it contains. And after you've squeezed out that pus, you feel so much better about it, because you've got all the gunk out, and the area around the boil begins to rapidly heal. I didn't go through any of the undulating emotions you'd have expected someone like me to experience on the death of their relationship. I didn't feel anger, hatred, bitterness, or even disappointment towards Barlow. In a nutshell, looking back, I rather suspect that the two girls that I eavesdropped on in the ladies' room, Stella and Dawn, had both been spot on when they said about me, "I think Rose has been in denial about Barlow and his shenanigans for a long time. Maybe underneath it all, she does know what's going on, but refuses to admit it to herself. Perhaps sometimes we don't want to see what is staring us brazenly in the face." Maybe they were right. Underneath it all, I probably did know about Barlow's infidelity and his unfaithfulness towards me. But I had refused to admit what was staring me in the face. It had been an urgent visit to the ladies' room, with a stomach that was giving me the heebie-jeebies, that had opened my eyes up to the terrible truth. But that truth had set me free. I sent an SMS to my husband Barlow saying, "I know all about your cheating. It turns out you've been doing the dirty behind my back since the day we got married. You've tried to make a fool of me, but it's over, Barlow, between the two of us. Finally, I've seen the light. You'll be hearing from my solicitor shortly. This is non-negotiable. It's over between us for good. And frankly, I don't want to see you again. Me and my mother have moved into Great Aunt Betsy's house, and I've taken everything from the house that I need. It's over. Good luck for the future. Rose." I skillfully packed a suitcase, and along with my mother we arrived at Aunt Betsy's house, and moved in straight away. We never looked back. Of course, it goes without saying, there was much drama that unfolded in my life with Barlow, who couldn't believe I had the audacity to dump him. He arrived at Aunt Betsy's house on the back of his dirt bike, looking as if he was slightly drunk. He banged on the door furiously, and I opened it for him, for failing to do so might have made him actually kick it in. "What the hell is all this about?" he demanded, slurring his words. "You sent me an SMS, Rose, saying it's over between us. What the hell is going on? How can you do this to me? You know we love each other," he said, looking at me pleadingly, like a dog begging its owner for a bone. "Look, Barlow, you're the one that's been cheating on me. It's not the other way round. You've been doing it for years. You even cheated on me on our wedding night, and I only found out about it the other day. I can't possibly stay with you in a relationship under the circumstances when you show me so little respect. I want out of our relationship, and you'll be hearing from my solicitors shortly. If you want to know the truth, Barlow, I've never been very happy with you. Something was always bothering me about my relationship with you, and I never knew what it was. But let's just say you've never supported me. You always work late, and now I know exactly why. I think underneath all your pathetic excuses, I really did know what was going on, but I just refused to admit it to myself. Aunt Betsy was absolutely right about you all along. I should have listened to her. She knew you'd do the dirty on me. She never trusted you. She never liked you. And it was with good reason." Barlow's face grew red. I could see anger rising up in his eyes. "Who told you I was cheating on you? I want to kill them. How dare they interfere in my life like this? Who told you? I want to know." "You mean how dare they tell me about your cheating? Is that what you're implying? Well, I'm very glad I found out, Barlow, and I'm not going to tell you in which way I found out. It's none of your business." All right, I admit I've been cheating. But it doesn't take away the fact that I love you, Rose. You're the woman for me. None of these women I've been with mean anything to me. It's just physical, that's all. If you lost a little weight, I might not have strayed." "Oh, so my weight gain is the problem, is it? It's my weight that made you stray? I might remind you, you married me when I was overweight. You're going to tell me that my weight is the cause of your infidelity? That it's all my fault? That's rich coming from you." "I'm attracted to slim women. But it's you, Rose, I love. I've only ever loved you. I promise you I'll stop cheating, but don't leave me. Please don't leave me, Rose. You're my world. Give me a second chance. Please, Rose. I can't live without you. I just can't. It's not possible." "If you loved me, Barlow, you wouldn't cheat on me, even if I was the size of a beluga whale. You say you don't find me attractive. But I tell you this, I don't find you attractive anymore either. Yes, you've got a perfect chiseled body, and you're very handsome, but it's the inside that really counts. That's where real beauty can be found. And your insides, well, they're not very nice, are they? Do you know what I realised on the morning of Aunt Betsy's funeral, even before I found out about your treacherous infidelity? Do you know what I was thinking to myself while you were getting dressed in your fancy suit and your tie? When you were whinging on and on about Great Aunt Betsy's funeral and how you'd much rather be playing golf. I thought to myself, what did I ever see in this man? He's not even remotely attractive. Because you know what? I was seeing the real you, buried beneath that perfect veneer. My words seemed to have hit a raw nerve with Barlow. He'd always believed he was God's gift to woman, and to be rejected by me had stung him hard.
You know what, Rose? This is all your great-aunt Betsy's doing. It's all her fault. Now she's dead, she's already haunting our lives with her hateful rhetoric. This is all her doing. I blame her.
Oh, for goodness sake, Barlow, get a grip, will you please? My deciding to divorce you has got nothing to do with great-aunt Betsy. But I will say this. She was a wise woman. She knew you were no good for me. Turns out she was absolutely right on the money about you. She warned me again and again about you before we got married. But I refused to listen because I was so blinded. I was so infatuated by your good looks. I was so flattered that you were showing interest in me, and I really believed I loved you. But I was wrong about all of those things. I don't think I've ever loved you, Barlow. I've been in love with the idea of being married to someone like you. But that was far too overrated, let me tell you. My mother marched angrily to the door, waving her hand furiously at Barlow, as if he was a rat she was chasing out of the house.
You heard my daughter, you scumbag. Leave us alone, will you? My daughter Rose doesn't need you in her life anymore, and she never did. You've been cheating on her for all these years. And on her wedding day of all things, you should be ashamed of yourself. You really are nothing but a sewer rat. I am disgusted with how you've treated her. And you thought she'd never find out about this. More fool you. Now get the hell out of here, will you? We never want to see you again.
I'm glad to say my husband Barlow did finally concede defeat and agreed to the divorce. The next thing I knew was that he had shacked up with a bank teller in town. The two of them were now happily living together. Good for them, I thought to myself, without an ounce of regret. I genuinely hoped that they would both be very happy together. It was amazing how quick it was for him to move on, but I didn't even feel offended by that. It was now a brand new chapter in my life, when I moved in with my mother into Great-Aunt Betsy's beautiful home, and Greta, Aunt Betsy's cat, became a much-loved member of our family. She would sleep in my arms every night, and I loved her company. I wanted to make the most of living on Great-Aunt Betsy's sprawling property. I had often wondered why such an independent woman could live on such a sizable plot of land and in such a large house. But Great-Aunt Betsy had loved the fresh, crisp air of the countryside, the wide open spaces, and the magnificently beautiful scenery, and who could blame her for that? She would regularly enjoy walks in the woods, where unfortunately she had met her tragic demise. But despite what had happened to Great-Aunt Betsy, it had never put me off taking regular walks in the woods myself. I genuinely believe the dreadful manner of her death had really been a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that is what happens with most accidents. I'm glad to say, slowly but surely, the extra body fat I'd been carrying for all these years miraculously began to disappear, without my needing to embark on any rigorous weight loss diet. I guess the weight loss came about because I was happy. I didn't need to snack all the time or overeat. Every morning, me and my mother would wake up to enjoy the exquisite views over the countryside, which we couldn't get enough of. We would drink coffee together on the wraparound porch and watch the sun slowly rise. And we'd do the same thing in the evenings, returning to exactly the same spot on the wraparound porch with a margarita in our hands to watch the sun setting as the sky became a mesmerizing collage of pinks, tangerines and golds. My mother was making excellent progress in recovering from the grief she had experienced over losing Great-Aunt Betsy. I was doing much the same. I think living together helped a lot. We helped heal each other's hurts, for we talked about our problems incessantly, rather like you might do in a therapist's office, and I'm sure it aided in our emotional recovery. Sometimes when you're hurting, You need someone there to listen to you, and that can make a world of difference. So yes, I think we healed each other. These days my mother had a noticeable glow in her skin. She was looking so much more content, and I noticed was making a studious effort with her appearance, which was an excellent sign that the drooping flower was finally beginning to revive itself. One day we were nonchalantly sitting on the porch together, after having watched the sun set. We were both drinking our usual margaritas, and even after the sun went down, given it was a warm night, we remained out of doors, watching the stars in the canopy above our heads. The moon cast her pearly light over the countryside. We both admired the Milky Way and pointed out the constellations. Greta was on the Adirondack table, cleaning herself after having been given a small saucer of tuna to eat. My mother was shaking the ice in her glass of margarita and draining what was left in her glass with a final slurpy sip. "I miss her," my mother said to me absent-mindedly, staring into space. "I really miss her. What a character she was." "You mean Great-Aunt Betsy?" I said. My mother nodded.
"Who else would I be talking about, Rose?" she chuckled. "I still wish I knew what had killed her," said my mother. "I can't believe you still walk in that wood grove after what happened to your great-aunt. Anything could be out there, you know."
"Well, I'm very careful, Mum, I can assure you of that. And I take bear spray with me as a precaution. Besides, what happened to Aunt Betsy was really a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I truly believe that, Mum. I mean, think about it. Every year a few people around the globe are randomly attacked and killed by sharks. But it doesn't stop people from swimming in the ocean, does it? Then what about traffic accidents that happen every year around the world, killing lots and lots of people? But people still drive in their cars, don't they? The accidents that they hear about don't stop them. What I'm saying, Mum, is when our time is up, I don't think there's a whole lot we can do about it."
"You make a very good point there, sweetheart. Still, I have to say, I was speaking to your aunt's very best friend, Hannah Odassis. What a lovely lady she is. She's so broken up about what happened to Aunt Betsy. I know she and your great-aunt Betsy were very close. They were planning a road trip together. We were both commiserating about her loss, you know. We got talking and she agreed with me. She said your aunt was not behaving right a week before her death. She seemed desperately frightened about something."
"She told you that?" I asked.
"Yes, she did," said my mother. "Think about it, Rose. Even the solicitor, Mr. Herringbone, said that your Aunt Betsy was in a dreadful hurry to get the details of her will verified with him. Almost as if she had a profound sense that she might just end up losing her life. It is rather like she predicted her own death, don't you think?"
"You're right. Maybe something was going on with her. I mean, if you and Hannah Odassis believe she was frightened about something before she died, then she obviously was. But what was upsetting her? That's the question."
"Goodness only knows. Great-Aunt Betsy, as we always said about her, was an open book. But she could hide her worries from us if she wanted to. And she did. Of that I am most sure."
"I think Great-Aunt Betsy had secrets. Mum, I really do. For a start, no one had a clue how wealthy she was. Yet she owned this expensive house, and beyond that I pretty much assumed she was not well off. I told her on many occasions, Mum, to sell this place, to raise some cash for herself, so she'd have more disposable income, and she never listened."
"Well, that was because she was stinking rich all along. But you're right, she was never in your face, not as much as we thought she was. Not really. Oh, by the way, Rose dear, I've been meaning to ask you, did you happen to read the letter from your great-aunt Betsy? Remember, Mr. Herringbone gave you a letter she wrote you in person. You never mentioned what the letter said. I'm curious to know about it."
"Oh, yes, I've got it somewhere in my drawer."
"You're not telling me you haven't read it, sweetheart. Why wouldn't you read her letter to you?"
I made a face. I couldn't bring myself to read it, Mum. I just couldn't.
"But why on earth not, love?"
"Well, you know, Great Aunt Betsy, she'd probably be going on and on in that letter about how the money she was leaving me was to be transferred to your account because she didn't want Barlow to get his hands on it. I guess she was saying some less than complimentary things about Barlow. I just couldn't bring myself to read what she had to say. I was such an ignorant fool to ever marry him, Mum. And I just didn't want to be reminded of all my mistakes. But, love, what makes you think she would be going on about Barlow in the letter she wrote you? I think that's very unlikely. Where did you get that absurd idea from? You won't know what the letter says unless you read it. Why don't you let me read it for you? I will tell you what it says. And if she's harping on and on about Barlow, I will then tell you not to read it. How about that? But I still think you should read that letter. It would be silly not to do it. I knew my mother was absolutely right. It really was ridiculous I hadn't read the letter yet. So I rose up out of the comfortable Adirondack chair that I'd been sitting on, nursing a margarita in my hands, and quickly went to my bedroom, pulling out the letter from my bedside table drawer. It was funny. We were living in Aunt Betsy's house now, but we were so comfortable here. It felt like her home had become ours. I gingerly handed Great Aunt Betsy's letter to my mother. My mother eagerly tore open the manila envelope. She began to read the letter. "Goodness gracious me," she said, opening the page and staring at it with wide eyes. "What is it, Mum? What is it? Why are you looking at the letter like that?" "This is not a letter to you, love. These pages that your Great Aunt Betsy left you, she tore directly out of her diary. Is that not strange?" "What?" I said, rushing over to my mother and snatching the papers from her hand. And slowly but surely I began to read what the entries in this diary said. I suddenly felt sure that the diary was going to shed light on my aunt's unfortunate demise. And it turns out I was not wrong about that. "Dear diary, how can I possibly tell anybody about this? No one would ever believe me if I tried to speak of such absurd things. People would invariably think I was going absolutely senile, and I couldn't blame them for that. In the same shoes, I would think the very same. So I daren't tell anybody about this, not even my best friend Hannah, because even she might think I was absolutely losing it. That's the trouble when you get to my age. People think when you speak about strange stuff that doesn't make any sense, that you're going absolutely balmy, that you might be developing dementia. I can't have people thinking that about me. I just can't. I knew I had to keep my mouth shut as a consequence about the matter. Although I will say I've been burning to talk to someone about this. But I guess I will lay it all down for you, diary, and imagine that you are my friend, whom I'm confiding in, even when all you are is a book of blank pages that I'm about to fill with my written hand. Well, it all began on one of my regular walks in the woodgrove, where I like to collect wild mushrooms, berries, and herbs. I like to make a Pacific tincture for cough medicine that I use during the winter months. It works marvellously to protect your immune system, and I swear by the stuff. I haven't had a cold in years. I really love my walks in the woodgrove. It's great exercise for the old joints. I love watching the woodland animals and the birds high up in the canopy of the trees. And we have so many exciting varieties, many which I've personally documented in a scrapbook of mine. It was on one very unassuming morning, very unremarkable it was, when I naturally expected the routines of my day to run down their normal, predictable course. But on this day I noticed that the atmosphere in the woods had suddenly shifted quite dramatically. It was so very unsettling for me. This was the first time that such a thing had happened. I don't mind admitting my heart began to gallop violently in my chest. It was so loud, in fact, that it drowned out the noises of my immediate environment. All I can say is I'd never known the woods to become so airy. I was hit by what I can only describe as a tsunami of fear. It overcame me so much that I froze to the spot. At first I thought I was under the formidable grip of a panic attack. My breathing became laboured. Fast and furious it was. I clearly was not getting enough oxygen into my lungs. My heart began to race. And I felt, like many people do when they're experiencing a panic attack, that I was invariably going to die. I was wondering where this panic was coming from. It was so alien to me to experience something like this. I've never been the kind of person that has been frightened by anything before. But something about this disquieting, unharmonious energy in the grove felt tangibly evil, menacious even. It was also disturbingly quiet, as if it was gripped by a sinister malaise. The bird song immediately dissipated, rather like the vaporizing steam from a kettle on the hob. I had the overwhelming sense that something was watching me. The feeling was so alarmingly spooky, it sent electric chills down my spine and physically made my skin prickle. Never experienced anything like that before. This, I'm afraid to say, was the beginning of many similar rather discomposing, distressing experiences for me during some of my leisurely walks in the grove. I would also at these times smell something rather repulsive on the wind that made me want to throw up in my mouth. It would smell like a rotting dead animal was in my midst, and there were sulphurous compounds that were attached to this hideously grotesque smell that rather reminded me of a rotten egg. Ironically, I could never find the source of that smell, which was rather troubling. But the smell would be there one minute and mysteriously go the next, which too I found exceedingly curious. When the smell lifted, then the bird song in the woods would finally return, and everything would become calm again. On these paradoxical occasions, I couldn't make sense of the uncongenial changes in the atmosphere that would come on as abruptly as the flick of a switch to turn on a light. I would return home with a determined resolve that I'd never go back into those woods again, not after experiencing such a dreadful panic attack. The following morning I would tell myself to stop being so silly for worrying about that, because you can't help when those kind of things come upon you, and I didn't want that to get the better of me. I would yet again embark on another energizing walk in the woods. I would tell myself I did not want to become a prisoner to an irrational, all-consuming fear. I will say there were plenty of times I would take leisurely walks in the woods and everything was very benign, and so incredibly pleasant that I will admit I almost forgot about the times when the ambience in the woods had been fraught with tension and alive with a sinister ambiguousness that could not be comprehended. One day I was to realize that my fears were not unfounded after all, that they did indeed have real substance to them. That was because I was to see the object of my fears, and nothing prepared me for what I was seeing. In truth, I was absolutely sure I had to be dreaming. I did a double take, almost as if I doubted my own eyes, but I knew what I was seeing was very real. During this occasion in the woods, on what I would describe as once again a pretty ordinary morning, where the routines were mapped out for me as they always were, I had no reason to suspect that I would experience that feeling of panic again, as I hadn't experienced it for several weeks. I was thoroughly enjoying the bird song in the canopy of the trees, and the pretty way the sun trickled through the branches. I was admiring it all, and reflecting on how incredibly lucky I was to live in such an enviable, prepossessing part of the world, which is something I never forget in a hurry, as I'm very well aware of my privileges. I thoroughly enjoy being on my own with myself and my thoughts. And let's not kid, Greta, my cat, is very good company for me. I've always been fond of cats, because they're as independent as I am, and can be extremely antisocial. So Greta and I, we get along rather famously together, and I'd never be without the likes of her. She brings me enormous comfort, and keeps my toes warm on a cold winter night, and I'm very thankful for that. So back to my story. I don't want to get carried away. But all of a sudden on this day, the bird song abruptly stopped. Everything became disturbingly quiet and uncongenial. In that moment, my first thoughts were,
Oh, please, God, no, not this again. I don't think I could bear it. My body began to tremble, reacting negatively to the sense of foreboding that overcame me, like a thick carpet of doom. In seconds it felt that the peaceful tranquillity I had enjoyed only moments before had been cruelly robbed from the grove by a thick, cloggy, invisible veil of malicious energy that swooped over the grove in an instant, as if determined to shut up and silence all those good feelings within me. All went swiftly silent in the grove, along with the bird song, that abruptly became mute. The wood grove became darker, as if a dimmer switch had been turned right down. Not even the pretty whispers of sunlight I'd seen moments before, peeping through the forest canopy, were visible now. An alarm bell sounded in my head. It was a rude awakening. I felt the urgent need to run away and escape the grove, but a crippling, irrational fear appeared to seize me. So hard, in fact, that I was caught under its grip, rather like a mouse in a trap, that could not get away fast enough. And believe me, it was all I wanted to do. My mind was screaming, "Betsy, for goodness sake, run!" But my legs failed to respond. They were like concrete blocks beneath me, refusing to obey the forthright commands of my body. As if there had been some kind of power failure within me, as if the wires from the brain to the legs had been cut off. I was like a wild animal that could sense a predator was in my midst, and I had the profound sense that this predator was far too close for comfort, and that my life was precariously beginning to hang in the balance. I could practically feel that predator breathing down my neck, even though I saw nothing. But I knew that something was there, and whatever it was watching me. Where was this thing, I wondered, and what was it? I could smell that god-awful, wretched, sulphurous smell of death and decay again. Only it was 1,000 times more offensive, much stronger. Once again I remained rooted to the spot, almost as if my unfaithful feet were anchored to the ground by a tangle of powerful roots, determined to keep me imprisoned to this one spot. All of a sudden I heard a rustle above my head in the trees. I looked up from where I was standing, because the sound grabbed my immediate attention, and that was when I saw him. I craned my neck upwards to look into that tree, and that was when I saw the hideous thing. I've never seen anything so grotesque in my entire life. There are no words to describe this thing. It looked like something the very bowels of hell had regurgitated and spat out. This creature stank to high heaven of those rancid sulphurous compounds, and I'm not sure what this thing was. It looked to me to be a cross between a human being and a wolf. It stood up straight on the tree branch, looking down on me, with a big, delighted smirk on its face, as if it was toying with me, like a cat does with a mouse. I'm in no doubt the creature wanted me to see it. That's why it had shaken the tree branches so vigorously, so that I would invariably look up into the tree and finally see him. The creature was swinging on the tree branch, moving his leg up and down, as if he was standing on a seesaw. The humanoid creature must have been easily over 7 foot tall, lanky, exceedingly muscular. It possessed a wolf-like head, a long German shepherd-like kind of tail, that was swishing around like a cat's does when it's agitated. It had paw-like hands, sharp talons for nails, that looked treacherously capable of doing a great amount of damage. This thing was covered in wispy black hair, dappled with brown patches. But in all my life, I have never seen anything more hideously vile or repugnant. This is the kind of creature that I would expect to see in the dominion of hell, stoking up the flames of the burning pit. When I saw this thing, I wanted to run away. I rarely did. But I stood there staring up at this creature in abject horror. I do believe everything was just so surreal for me that I was beginning to wonder if my mind was playing tricks on me. This could not be happening, could it? The creature was looking directly at me, with hostile dark eyes that appeared to have no light in them. His muzzle was open, And that was when I observed two very intimidating rows of dagger-like sharp canine teeth. This thing began to drool. Globlets of spittle were dropping out of its mouth and landing on the branch on which he was standing. I know it sounds profoundly strange, but I had a sense that this insidious creature was mocking me and thoroughly revelling in my fear, and I could feel his intense hatred towards me that was so tangible that I even heard the very strange words in my head. I want to kill you. I want to kill you. And when the thoughts entered my mind, the creature began to growl. The growl, he admitted, was terrifying. Believe me, I've seen dangerous dogs in my time, dogs that get unduly aggressive. But this growl was like nothing I've ever heard before. It filled me with a feeling of impending dread. In that terrifying moment, I knew nothing good could come from my encounter with this malignant beast. I thought I must have imagined the words that were spoken into my head. But I'm telling you, they could not have been from my own imagination. The voice that spoke to me in my head was not my own. The next thing I knew is that the creature was still growling at me, but he jumped off the tree branch nimbly, landing on his feet with the agility of my cat. I've never seen anything like this before. He was so large, and yet so incredibly dexterous. I felt the danger I was in at once. It was like my body seemed to jerk into action, rather like a stalling car that refuses to start in the beginning, and then all of a sudden the engine erupts into an explosion of energy, so that at long last you can drive that car. This thing, once he'd landed on the ground, was standing only feet away from me. He was smirking at me. I'm telling you, that smirk was cocky, arrogant, and prideful. And I knew this horrible creature was revelling in my fear, like someone getting a great deal of pleasure out of a movie they're watching. I let out a piercing scream and began to run like I have never run before or since. It was like my adrenaline was spiked. It suddenly inspired my body to run like the wind. And believe me, I did. I was never a great runner when I was a schoolgirl all those years back. I was always the last in school sports. But on this morning when I ran, I would have beaten the fastest runner in my class at school, without a single doubt. It was like I'd suddenly been put on steroids. This repugnant creature began to give me chase. In that moment, I quite literally saw my life flash before my very eyes. I thought I was about to die. When I finally reached the house, I looked behind me. The creature had stopped in his tracks. He didn't give me any more chase, but stood on the edge of the grove just smirking at me. It was like he was arrogantly saying, I'm not going to kill you now, but I will do so when the time is right. I'm going to bide my time with you, have my fun first. I hurriedly bolted myself indoors, my heart pounding a dime to a dozen. I was breathing furiously fast. It took me a long time to regain my composure. I was in such an alarmed state. I'm grateful my adrenaline had helped me run away. But I am in no delusional doubt that this creature could have easily caught up with me if it had wanted to, and killed me. The question is, why did he not? I really got the impression he was revelling in my fear, that he was toying with me. And I have a sense that this thing definitely wants to kill me.
So there we are. That's the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.